Clara Bennett knew the bargain was cruel before the wagon even stopped, but she did not understand how dangerous it was until she saw the man waiting on the porch. The Reed Ranch stood beyond a wide field of dry grass outside Red Hollow, Colorado. The main house was larger than any home Clara had ever entered. It had white walls, tall windows, a deep wooden porch, and a stone chimney rising above the roof. Beyond it stood 2 barns, a bunkhouse, and rows of cattle stretching toward the distant hills. Clara stepped down from the wagon with one worn bag in her hand. She was 19 years old, small, quiet, and painfully shy. She had spent most of her life avoiding attention. Her brown dress had been patched at the elbows, and the bonnet tied beneath her chin had once belonged to her mother. Inside her bag were 2 dresses, a wooden comb, her mother's Bible, and a letter signed by her uncle, Clara Bennett. The letter claimed Clara owed him $300. Clara knew that was not the real reason she had come. After her parents died, Silas had taken Clara and her 2 younger brothers into his home. At first, he had called it charity. Later, he told Clara that feeding 3 children had ruined him. Her brothers, 12-year-old Owen and 9-year-old Henry, still lived under his roof. Silas had given Clara a choice. She could agree to marry Mason Reed, the wealthiest cattleman in Red Hollow, or Silas would send Owen and Henry to separate work farms in different parts of Colorado. Clara had agreed before he finished speaking. She did not know Mason Reed. She did not love him. She did not even know why a rich man would want a poor, frightened girl for a wife. But she knew what would happen to her brothers if she refused. The wagon driver placed her bag beside her. "This is the place, miss." Clara swallowed, "Thank you." The front door opened before she could take another step. Mason Reed walked onto the porch. He was tall and broad with dark hair beneath a black hat. His face was sun-browned and his gray eyes were serious. He wore a clean shirt, a brown vest, and boots marked by ranch dust. He looked strong enough to frighten most men. Clara lowered her eyes. This was the stranger she had promised to marry. Mason came down the porch steps and removed his hat. "Miss Bennett?" "Yes, sir." His eyes moved toward her small bag, then he looked back at her. "You traveled alone." Clara nodded. A quiet anger passed across his face, though she did not know whether it was meant for her. "I was told you understood the agreement," he said. "My uncle said you wanted a wife." Mason's jaw tightened. "Your uncle has said many things that were not true." Clara looked up in surprise. Before she could ask what he meant, an older woman appeared in the doorway. Her silver hair was tied in a neat bun, and flour marked the front of her blue apron. "Good heavens, Mason," she called. "Do not question the poor girl in the yard. She looks ready to fall over." Mason picked up Clara's bag. "This is Mrs. Harper," he said. "She manages the house." Mrs. Harper came down the steps and gently touched Clara's arm. "Come inside, dear. You must be tired." Clara followed them into the house. The inside was warm and clean. It smelled of fresh bread, coffee, pine wood, and smoke from the fireplace. The furniture was plain but well made. A clock ticked above the mantel, filling the silence. The house did not feel like the home of a proud, rich man. It felt like the home of someone who had lost too much. Near the fireplace, Clara noticed a little pair of boots. A cloth doll sat in a wooden chair with one torn arm tied by a green ribbon. Mason followed her eyes but said nothing. Mrs. Harper led Clara upstairs to a small bedroom overlooking the river. The room held a bed, a washstand, a wooden chest, and curtains covered with tiny yellow flowers. "This will be your room," Mrs. Harper said. Clara turned toward her. "My own room." Mrs. Harper looked toward Mason, who stood in the hall. Mason placed Clara's bag beside the bed. "You will stay here until you decide what you want to do." Clara stared at him. "What I want?" "Yes." Her uncle had not asked what she wanted in years. Clara gripped the edge of her bonnet. "But the marriage. There will be no wedding unless you choose it." Fear entered her chest. "Mr. Reed, my brothers are still with my uncle." "I know. If I do not marry you, he will send them away." Mason's expression grew hard. He will not touch those boys. You do not know him. No, Mason said quietly, but he does not know me either. He left the room before Clara could answer. That evening, Clara came downstairs after washing the dust from her face. She stopped near the parlor when she heard a child crying. Mason sat beside the fireplace with a little girl curled against his chest. She looked about 5 years old. Her dark curls covered his arm and her face was wet with tears. Mason held the cloth doll Clara had seen earlier. I can fix it tomorrow, he told the child. You always say tomorrow, the girl whispered. Clara stepped back, but the floorboard creaked. Mason looked toward her. The little girl turned her face against him. This is Ruby, he said. She is my sister's daughter. Mrs. Harper came from the kitchen carrying a bowl. Ruby's mother died last winter, she explained softly. Clara's heart tightened. I am sorry. Mason gave a small nod. Ruby looked at Clara with careful eyes. Are you the lady who came to marry Uncle Mason? Clara's cheeks burned. Mason's face became still. No one is getting married today, he said. Ruby studied Clara for another moment. Can you sew? A little. The child held out the broken doll. Clara took it gently. I think I can fix her. Ruby climbed down from Mason's lap and followed Clara to a chair near the lamp. Clara found a needle and thread in a small basket. Her fingers moved slowly as she repaired the torn cloth arm. Ruby watched every stitch. Mason remained near the fireplace, silent. When Clara finished, Ruby hugged the doll against her chest. She is better. Clara smiled faintly. Sometimes a tear can be repaired. Ruby ran upstairs to show Mrs. Harper. Mason continued staring at Clara. What? She asked softly. My sister used to say the same thing. At supper, Clara sat across from Mason at a long wooden table. Mrs. Harper had prepared roast beef, potatoes, bread, and beans. Clara took only a small amount. Mason noticed. You can eat as much as you need. I am not very hungry. You have looked at the bread 4 times. Clara lowered her eyes. At Silas's house, she had learned to eat slowly so Owen and Henry could have more. Her uncle often reminded them that every bite cost him money. Mason pushed the bread basket closer. There is enough food in this house. Clara took 1 piece. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Then Mason placed his fork down. Your uncle told me you wanted this marriage. Clara looked at him. He said you wanted it. I never asked him to find me a wife. Her hand froze. Then why did he send me? Mason leaned back. Silas owes me money. The room suddenly felt colder. Clara's voice became weak. How much? Nearly $400. Her eyes filled with fear. He told me I owed him $300. Mason's expression darkened. I never agreed to take you as payment. Clara stood so quickly that her chair scraped the floor. Then he tricked both of us. It appears so. My brothers. I sent a rider to bring them here. Clara's heart jumped. When? This afternoon. She pressed both hands against the table. What if Silas refuses? Then I will go myself. No. The word escaped before she could stop it. Mason looked at her. Clara's voice trembled. He becomes cruel when someone challenges him. So do many cowards. After supper, Clara asked Mrs. Harper for work. She could not sit in a rich house while her brothers remained trapped. Mrs. Harper brought her a basket of torn clothes and placed it beside a sewing table in the parlor. Clara worked beneath the soft lantern light while the house grew quiet. At the bottom of the basket, she found a small blue coat belonging to Ruby. One pocket had torn loose. As Clara turned it over, something fell onto the floor. It was an old folded paper. She picked it up and saw a woman's name written across the front. Margaret Reed. Clara should have placed it back inside the pocket. Instead, she noticed another name beneath it. Clara Bennett. Her breath caught. She slowly unfolded the paper. It was a letter written 6 years earlier. Clara read the first lines once, then she read them again. Margaret Reed had written that Clara Bennett had taken money from the Red Hollow Church Fund. She claimed she had seen him change the church records and blame the missing money on another woman. That woman was Clara's mother. Clara's hands began to shake. Clara had always said her mother died in shame after stealing from the church. He had used that story to control Clara for years. A floorboard creaked behind her. Clara turned. Mason stood in the doorway, staring at the letter in her hands. His face had gone pale. "Where did you find that?" he asked. It was inside Ruby's coat. Mason crossed the room and took the paper carefully. As he read it, his eyes filled with anger. Clara could barely breathe. "My mother did not steal the money, did she?" Mason looked at her. "No." The word struck Clara harder than any insult. She covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. Mason continued reading. Near the bottom of the letter, Margaret had written one final warning. Clara knew she had discovered the truth. 3 days after the letter was written, Margaret Reed had died in a wagon accident. Mason's hand closed around the paper. Clara stared at him through her tears. "That was your sister?" "Yes." "And she knew what my uncle had done." Mason raised his eyes toward the dark window. Outside, a horse suddenly raced into the yard. A rider shouted from below. Mason hurried toward the front door. Clara followed him onto the porch. The ranch hand who had gone for her brothers was bent over his saddle, blood running from a cut above his eye. Mason caught his arm as he climbed down. "What happened?" The man struggled to speak. Clara would not release the boys. Clara gripped the porch post. The rider looked at her with fear. He said if Miss Bennett asks about the old church money again, she will never see her brothers alive. Clara stood frozen on the porch, while the injured rider leaned against Mason. For one terrible moment, she could not hear the wind or the horses moving in the yard. She could only hear Cela's threat repeating inside her mind. She would never see her brothers alive. Mason helped the rider into the house and ordered one of the ranch hands to fetch Mrs. Harper. Clara followed them, but her legs felt weak. The rider's name was Daniel Price. Blood covered one side of his face, though the cut was not deep. Mrs. Harper cleaned it while Mason questioned him. "Tell me everything," Mason said. Daniel held a cloth against his forehead. "I reached Bennett's farm before sunset. Cela's came outside with a rifle. I told him you had sent me for the boys. He laughed and said they belonged to him until Clara finished paying her family debt." Clara gripped the back of a chair. "Did you see Owen and Henry?" Daniel nodded. "They were watching from the barn. Owen tried to run toward me, but Cela's caught him. Then 2 hired men came from behind the house." "What happened next?" Mason asked. "They pulled me from the saddle. Cela's said the next man you sent would not return." Mason's face became cold. Clara knew that look now. It was not wild anger. It was something quieter and more dangerous. Daniel continued. "Before I left, Cela's told me to give Miss Bennett a warning. He said she should forget the church money, forget the letter, and marry you before the end of the week." Clara stared at him. How did he know about the letter? No one answered. Mason looked down at the old paper still in his hand. Only a few people had known Clara found it. Mason, Clara, Mrs. Harper, and perhaps Ruby if she had remembered the paper inside her coat. Someone had carried the news to Cela's. Mrs. Harper looked toward the kitchen window. That means he has someone watching this ranch. Mason turned to Daniel. "How many men were with him?" "3 that I saw, maybe more inside." Mason walked toward the gun cabinet. Clara stepped in front of him. "You cannot go there alone." "I will not be alone. He wants you angry. He wants you to ride into a trap." Mason stopped. Clara's voice shook, but she forced herself to continue. He knows you will come for the boys. That is why he sent Daniel back alive. Mason studied her face. What do you think we should do? The question surprised her. No man had ever asked for her judgment before. Clara looked toward Margaret Reed's letter. We need proof before we face him. We have the letter. He will say it is false. Then we find the church records. Clara nodded. And someone who saw what happened. Mrs. Harper lowered the cloth from Daniel's wound. My brother, Reverend Thomas Harper, kept the church records before Silas took control of them. Mason looked at her. Where is he? He lives in Willow Creek, almost 20 miles north. Mason reached for his coat. We leave at first light. Clara shook her head. I am going with you. No. They are my brothers. And Silas is expecting you. I have spent years doing what Silas expected because I was afraid. I will not remain here while other people risk their lives for my family. Mason's eyes stayed on hers. The shy girl who had arrived with lowered eyes was still frightened, but something inside her had changed. At last, Mason nodded. You stay beside me the whole time. Before sunrise, Mason prepared a wagon instead of horses. Mrs. Harper packed bread, dried meat, blankets, and a small medicine box. Clara wore a heavy gray coat and kept Margaret's letter hidden inside her mother's Bible. Ruby stood on the porch holding her repaired doll. Will you come back? The child asked. Clara knelt in front of her. Yes. You promise? Clara looked at Mason, then back at Ruby. I promise I will try. Ruby wrapped her arms around Clara's neck. Mason turned his face away, but Clara saw the emotion in his eyes. They left the ranch as pale sunlight touched the mountains. The road to Willow Creek passed through open fields, pine-covered hills, and a narrow canyon where the ground remained cold even during summer. Mason drove while Clara sat beside him. For several miles, neither spoke. Then Clara asked the question that had remained in her heart since the night before. Why was Margaret's letter hidden inside Ruby's coat? Mason tightened his grip on the reins. I do not know. Did the coat belong to Margaret? Yes, she made it for Ruby before she died. Clara looked toward the road. Maybe Margaret hid the letter there. Maybe. But Ruby wore that coat many times. Why did no one find it? The lining was repaired last month. Mrs. Harper may have placed it in the sewing basket after noticing the torn pocket. Clara touched the Bible beneath her coat. Silas said Margaret died in a wagon accident. That is what everyone believed. You do not believe it anymore. Mason's face hardened. My sister was careful. She knew those roads better than anyone. The wagon went over a cliff on a clear morning. No storm, no broken wheel, no reason. Clara's stomach tightened. You think Silas caused it? I think he had a reason to silence her. The wagon entered the canyon. Tall rock walls rose on both sides, hiding the sun. Mason slowed the horses. Clara heard something behind them. Hoofbeats. She turned. Two riders appeared at the bend in the road. Their hats were low, hiding their faces. Mason. I see them. The riders moved faster. Mason handed Clara the reins. Keep the horses straight. What are you doing? He reached beneath the seat and pulled out a rifle. The first rider drew near. Stop the wagon, the man shouted. Mason raised the rifle. Turn around. The rider laughed. Silas only wants the girl. Clara's hands tightened around the reins. The second rider moved toward her side of the wagon. Mason fired into the ground near the man's horse. The animal jumped back. The first rider pulled a pistol. Before he could aim, a shot echoed from the ridge above. The man's hat flew from his head. Everyone looked up. An older man stood among the rocks holding a hunting rifle. Ride away, he shouted. or the next shot will not miss your hat." The two riders turned and disappeared down the canyon. Mason lowered his rifle. The older man climbed carefully from the ridge. He had white hair, a weathered face, and a black coat faded by years of sun. Mrs. Harper had described her brother exactly. "Reverend Harper," Mason called. The man came closer. "Mason Reed, I heard you might come." Clara stared at him. "How did you know?" "Someone reached Willow Creek yesterday asking questions about old church records. I thought trouble might follow." They continued to Reverend Harper's small home near the edge of town. It stood beside a wooden chapel surrounded by cottonwood trees. Inside, the Reverend locked the door and closed the curtains. Clara placed Margaret's letter on the table. The old man read it slowly. When he reached the end, his shoulders dropped. "I feared this paper was destroyed." "You knew about it?" Clara asked. Reverend Harper looked at her with sorrow. "Your mother came to me 6 years ago. She had discovered money missing from the church fund. Silas controlled the books, but he blamed her because she helped collect donations." Clara's eyes filled. "Why did no one defend her?" "I tried, then my house burned. The church leaders became afraid. Silas produced false pages that appeared to carry your mother's writing." Mason leaned forward. "Do you still have the real records?" Reverend Harper walked to the fireplace. He removed one loose stone and reached into a narrow space behind it. From there, he pulled out a leather ledger wrapped in cloth. "I hid this before leaving Red Hollow." Clara opened the book carefully. The pages showed every donation, every payment, and every missing amount. Beside several false entries was Clara Bennett's signature. Reverend Harper pointed to one page. "Your mother repaid money she never stole because she wanted to protect you children from public shame." Clara pressed a hand against her mouth. "She paid him. She sold your father's land and gave Silas nearly everything." Clara felt sick. The land had been meant for her and her brothers. Silas had taken it and still claimed they owed him money. Mason turned another page. "What is this?" Reverend Harper's face darkened. It was a payment record from a man named Victor Hale, owner of a large cattle company outside Willow Creek. The note beside it read, "Reed Northern Pasture." Mason read it twice. "My northern pasture was damaged the week before Margaret died. Someone cut the fence and drove my cattle into the canyon." Reverend Harper nodded. "Victor Hale wanted your land. Silas promised he could force you to sell." Clara looked between them. "Then why send me to marry Mason?" Mason's expression changed. "He did not send you to settle a debt." Reverend Harper closed the ledger. "He sent you to get inside the Reed house." Clara went pale. "He wanted me to spy on Mason." "Perhaps," the Reverend said, "or he expected the marriage to give him a claim to the ranch through you." Clara stepped back from the table. Silas had never planned to save her brothers. Even if she married Mason, he would have kept them as tools. A sudden knock sounded at the door. Everyone became still. Then a boy's voice came from outside. "Reverend Harper, please open the door." Clara knew that voice. She rushed forward, but Mason caught her arm. "Wait." The voice came again, weak and shaking. "Clara, it is me." "Owen." Mason opened the door carefully. Owen fell into Clara's arms. His shirt was torn, his face bruised, and his feet were covered in mud. Clara held him so tightly he cried out. "Where is Henry?" she asked. Owen began to sob. "Silas took him to the old mining camp." "Why?" "He said you found the letter. He said Henry will stay alive only if you bring the ledger to him before tomorrow night." Mason looked toward the dark road outside. Owen clutched Clara's coat. "There is something else." "What?" Owen looked at Mason with frightened eyes. "Silas said Miss Margaret did not die in an accident." The room fell silent. Owen swallowed. "He said he can prove who killed her." Clara held Owen close, while the meaning of his words settled over the room. Silas could prove who killed Margaret Reed. Mason stood beside the table with both hands pressed against the wood. His face had gone still, but Clara could see the pain behind his eyes. "What exactly did he say?" Mason asked. Owen wiped his face with his sleeve. "He said Mr. Reed had blamed the wrong man for 6 years. He said the proof was hidden at the old mining camp with Henry." Reverend Harper looked toward the window. "The Blackstone mine has been empty for years. The buildings are falling apart." "How many men are with Silas?" Mason asked. "I saw 3, Owen answered. Victor Hale was there too." Mason looked at the payment record inside the church ledger. Victor Hale had paid Silas to damage the Reed Ranch. If both men were waiting at the mine, the meeting was not meant to end peacefully. Clara closed the ledger. "We have to go." Mason shook his head. "You are staying here with Owen. Henry is there because of me. He is there because Silas is cruel. And Silas expects me to bring the ledger. If I do not go, he may hurt Henry before you reach him." Mason stepped closer. "I will not place you in his hands." Clara lifted her eyes. "All my life, Silas used my fear to control me. He knew I would stay quiet. He knew I would obey. That ends tonight." Mason stared at her for a long moment. The shy girl who had arrived at his ranch with trembling hands was gone. Clara was still afraid, but courage did not mean the absence of fear. It meant moving forward while fear begged her to stop. Mason finally nodded. "You stay beside me." Reverend Harper placed the ledger inside a leather bag. "I am coming too." Owen quickly stood. "So am I." "No," Clara said. "You escaped once. You will stay here where you are safe." "But Henry is my brother." Clara took his face between her hands. "And I need to know one of you is safe. Please, Owen." The boy began to cry again, but he nodded. Before they left, Reverend Harper sent a trusted neighbor to the Willow Creek sheriff. The mine was several miles away, and they did not know whether help would arrive in time. Night had fallen when Clara, Mason, and the Reverend started toward Blackstone Camp. Clouds covered the moon. The wagon lantern showed only a small piece of the road ahead. Pine branches moved in the cold wind, and every shadow seemed to hide a rider. Clara held her mother's Bible beneath her coat. Margaret's letter remained between its pages. Mason drove quickly. After an hour, the broken mine buildings appeared beyond the trees. An old wooden tower leaned above the dark hillside. Empty cabins surrounded a wide yard covered in stones and weeds. A lantern burned inside the largest building. Mason stopped the wagon. "Stay behind me." They walked into the yard carrying the leather bag. The door opened. Clara Bennett stepped outside with a pistol in his hand. Victor Hale stood beside him. He was a heavy man in an expensive coat. 2 armed riders waited near the wall. Henry sat inside the building with his hands tied. "Clara," he cried. She moved toward him, but Silas raised the pistol. "One more step, and your brother pays for it." Clara stopped. Silas smiled. "You always were easy to guide." "Let Henry go." "Give me the ledger." Clara held up the leather bag. "You will have it after he is free." Victor laughed. "You are not in a position to bargain." Mason stepped beside Clara. "Neither are you. The sheriff knows where we are." Silas's smile weakened. "You are lying." Reverend Harper came forward. "The real church records will be shown to every family in Red Hollow. Even if you burn this copy, the truth will not disappear." Victor looked sharply at Silas. "You said no one else knew." Silas turned toward him. "Keep quiet." Clara noticed fear growing between the two men. Their partnership had been built on greed, not trust. She looked at Henry. He was frightened but unharmed. "What happened to Margaret Reed?" Clara asked. Mason's body became tense beside her. Silas gave a slow smile. "Ask Victor." Victor's face changed. Silas continued before he could stop him. Margaret found the payment records. She planned to take them to the sheriff. Victor followed her wagon into the hills. "That is a lie," Victor said. Silas laughed. "You cut the wheel, strap yourself." Mason moved forward. Victor pulled his pistol. "Stay back." Clara's heart pounded. Silas had not brought proof to reveal a killer. He had brought Victor because each man knew enough to destroy the other. Victor turned his weapon toward Silas. "You promised to keep your mouth shut. And you promised me half the Reed land." The two men stared at each other, forgetting everyone else for one dangerous moment. Clara moved. She ran toward Henry. One of the riders reached for her, but Reverend Harper struck his arm with a wooden cane. Mason rushed at the second man and knocked the pistol from his hand. A gunshot filled the camp. Clara dropped beside Henry. Victor had fired at Silas, but the bullet struck the wall. Silas ran toward the mine entrance. Victor chased him. Mason cut Henry's ropes. "Take him to the wagon," he told Clara. "What about you?" "I cannot let them escape." Before Clara could answer, the ground shook beneath them. A deep crack came from the old mine. Silas had entered a tunnel weakened by years of rain and neglect. Victor followed him, firing into the darkness. Then part of the entrance collapsed. Dust and rocks poured into the yard. "Help me," Silas shouted from inside. Mason ran toward the tunnel. Clara caught his arm. "It could fall again. He may know where the rest of the evidence is. He may also die." Mason looked at her. Clara remembered how Silas had threatened her brothers, stolen her parents' land, ruined her mother's name, and used her like property. Part of her wanted to turn away. But Henry was watching. She could not teach her brother that cruelty should be answered with cruelty. "We save him," she said. Mason and Reverend Harper pulled loose boards from a broken cabin. Together, they lifted the fallen beam blocking the entrance. Silas crawled out first, coughing and bleeding from his forehead. Victor followed with an injured leg. The sound of horses came from the road. The Willow Creek sheriff rode into camp with 4 men. Silas tried to stand, but Clara stepped in front of him. He looked at her with the same proud expression he had worn for years. "You owe me your life," he said. Clara did not lower her eyes. "No, you stole part of it." The sheriff searched Silas's coat and found letters carrying Victor's signature. One described the plan to damage Mason's ranch. Another promised payment after Margaret Reed was silenced. Victor began shouting that Silas had planned everything. Silas accused Victor of killing Margaret. By sunrise, both men were in chains. Henry rode back to Willow Creek between Clara and Mason. When Owen saw his brother, he ran from Reverend Harper's house and wrapped both arms around him. Clara knelt beside them. For the first time since their parents died, all 3 were free. The church ledger cleared their mother's name. The false debt was removed, and the land Silas had stolen was returned to Clara and her brothers. Victor confessed that he had damaged Margaret's wagon after Silas told him she carried evidence against them. He had not meant for her to die, but his fear of prison had kept him silent. Mason listened without speaking. Clara stood beside him through the confession. He did not forgive Victor, but he finally knew the truth. Weeks later, spring rain turned the fields around Reed Ranch green. Owen and Henry moved into the ranch house. Ruby followed them everywhere, laughing louder than Clara had ever heard her laugh. Clara helped Mrs. Harper in the kitchen, repaired clothes for the ranch workers, and taught the children to read from her mother's Bible. One evening, Mason found Clara sitting beneath the cottonwood trees near the river. "You could return to your family land," he said. "It belongs to you now." Clara looked toward the ranch house. Ruby stood on the porch with Owen and Henry. Mrs. Harper called them inside for supper. "Do you want me to leave?" Clara asked. Mason sat beside her. "No." His voice was quiet. "But I will not keep you here because of a bargain." Clara looked at him. "Then why would you keep me?" Mason removed his hat. Because this house felt empty before you came. Because Ruby smiles again. Because your brothers have brought life back to the ranch. He paused. And because I have fallen in love with you. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Mason looked away, as though he feared her answer. Clara reached for his hand. I agreed to marry a rich cowboy because I wanted to save my brothers. Mason turned toward her. But now, he asked. Clara smiled. Now I would marry a good man because I love him. They were married 1 month later beneath the cottonwood trees. Clara wore a simple white dress Mrs. Harper had sewn for her. Ruby carried flowers. Owen and Henry stood beside Mason, proud and smiling. Reverend Harper placed Margaret's letter and Clara's mother's cleared church record inside a wooden box. The box was kept in the Reed home, not as a memory of shame, but as proof that truth could survive even after cruel men tried to bury it. As the sun lowered over Red Hollow, Mason held Clara's hand. She had arrived at the ranch, believing she was payment for a debt. She stayed because she had found something no bargain could buy. A family, a home, and a love she had finally chosen for herself.